This is the amount of money spent on political campaigns and in lobbying in the US. Where does the money come from? Wait, hold on. Aren't we supposed to be like a business tech channel? And that's exactly the problem, because a good chunk of that money comes precisely from businesses.
You have to go to those people who have money, and they always want something.
Years ago, we made a financial report on what we had expended.
Unlimited thresholds for super PACs that are predominantly funded by CEOs and business people. Money shouldn't be speech, there shouldn't be unlimited contributions, and businesses are not the political, moral, or ethical equal of working people.
Come on, skip right up and down.
The very essence of democracy is that each one of us, each citizen, gets equal rights, gets one vote, one equal say in the decisions that our country makes. But as much as I love democracy, and as much as I'm not a big fan of any of the alternatives, that idea of equality is a bit of a lie. Because currency, not votes, is the currency of politics. A dangerous combination of bad laws, misinformation, and just good old greed has caused democracy to become a bit of a fallacy. And it's not all lost, though, but solutions require people to understand how things work. And we're kind of good at explaining stuff. But stop. First, a disclaimer. This is a video about the economics of these businesses and not an attack on any political party. So even though blue and reddish are our brand colors, we're gonna strip them today to avoid any confusion and just focus on how the system works. All right, so this is Company Forensics, the business of buying politicians. To make sense of this, we're gonna need to do a quick timeline to understand lobbying, which I know, it sounds boring as hell, but I promise we'll be quick and fun. Because if we get rid of our tinfoil hats for a moment, we need to understand that some form of lobbying is good and crucial for democracy. In its earliest forms, constituents in England would wait in the lobby of Parliament to speak to their representatives, and that's where the name lobbying comes from. And how else would they be heard if no one is speaking or reaching out to their representatives? But most people just don't care enough about politics to go wait in a lobby anymore. We're also closing in on 1 million people represented per elected official, up from 33,000 when the US government was originally designed. So there needs to be some structure about these. People need to be organized into interest groups. Even in a digital age, messages need to be funneled so that representatives' inbox don't look like mine, which, by the way, brings us to today's sponsor. Sunsema helps make your to-do list manageable and helps you get work done without burning out. In a nutshell, it connects to the sources of your tasks like ClickUp or Asana or Notion or Slack, and of course your email, and it lets you organize and plan out your day so that your workload is manageable. It then syncs that back up to your calendar to block out the time that you need to do your tasks. And as you go through your day, Sunsema Focus Mode lets you focus on the single task at hand, track the time it took you to finish it, and move on to the next one. I've been using it for the past few months, and it really helps me plan out a work day that is truly manageable. Finish it and feel less frustrated about the stuff that's pending, because I know it'll get done the next day. The team has given you guys a free trial, no credit card required, if you use the link in the description to sign up.
Where does the real power lie? The power behind the power.
So in an ideal world, the job of a lobbyist is to consolidate the voices of the citizens and interest groups, filling in the gaps of a legislator and how much they understand about the towns that they represent, and bring additional data and insights. But who are the interest groups behind them? And how accurate is that data in this era of misinformation? Put a pin on that, we'll get back to it. But the point is that reaching out to them is a fair aspect of any democracy. The First Amendment of the US Constitution reads, everybody should be able to buy an AK-40, no, that's not the one. Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's all great in theory, but the truth is most lobbyists have always represented companies and not people. In the late 1800s, for example, the railroad industry was huge, and so they started hiring lobbyists to convince the government to give them land or to deregulate ticket prices or exclusivity rights. So lobbyists are often paid by companies, but they manage to rally up civilians through media and public forums just to add to their causes. If you use misinformation to convince people to rally for the interests of the business, if those citizens are passionate about these things, shouldn't they be heard? I mean, who's to say otherwise? The point is they did. In the 1800s, lobbyists made railroad operators so powerful that they had practically become a monopoly. And so at that time, another organization lobbied Congress to pass a law and stop them. That was objectively a good lobby that stopped another one from building a monopoly. But this cycle has repeated itself since. The cycle usually looks like a few decades of lobbying against the interest of people, followed by public outcry, media attention, and then concluded with a new law to at least try and patch the problem. It's no wonder why lobbying gets such a bad rep then, even though the origins for lobbying are still those people waiting in a lobby trying to get the stuff that they need done by their government. But by now, the dictionary definition of lobbying is the activity of trying to persuade someone in authority, usually an elected member of a government, to support laws or rules that give your organization or industry an advantage. And so this begs the question, how do lobbyists manage to convince politicians to pass legislation that goes against people's interests? With money. And that brings us to today's Explainer Time. Explainer Time! Pretty much all democracies around the world agree on two things. Political candidates need money for their campaigns. That spending helps the democratic process because it informs people of who to vote for. And two, if that money comes from private individuals, it needs to be very carefully regulated. Many governments, including the US, have a designated public or tax-funded budget for campaigns. The problem is, in the US, if you use that budget, you are capped on how much you can spend on the campaign. This is how much was spent on each presidential election over the last few years. And this tiny bar is what they would have been able to spend if they used any money from the presidential election campaign fund. Because in the end, elections are a numbers game. Money spent translates to votes, and like cost of acquisition in our startup or in the marketing world. In fact, I ran a CAC, or maybe a CPV, report on the cost per vote for the last 5 elections, and it looks like $17 is what you have to aim at spending to get a vote. The campaign fund is nowhere near enough to get to $17 per vote. So from 2008 and on, candidates have chosen to take the chances and raise money from other means. That means individuals, and sometimes that money can be written off taxes, or sometimes it's matched by the government. But how about companies?
Alphabet spent more than $21 million on lobbying last year.
None of them are here, but 600 lobbyists from insurance companies and big pharma.
Corporations spend shit tons of money and then obviously get preferential treatment.
Corporate donations to politicians were banned in 1907, and that ban extended to unions in 1943. Wait, hold on. Yeah, there's a workaround for that. They figured that they could create a company, technically a committee, that could pool money from a lot of people, still not companies, and donate a little bit of money to the campaign, but mostly act on their own to help candidates. They can organize events and fundraisers, they can pay ads, they can move voters as long as they don't directly coordinate with the candidate. But that's kind of a great line. Very crucially, PACs are most certainly allowed to lobby. And so we unlock this first Pandora box. Money, while not directly controlled by the candidate, money to aid the campaign and to help the case that they're trying to lobby for. The number of PACs in the US would grow to the thousands by the early 90s, but something happened in 2010 that changed everything.
Activists from across New York City gathered near Wall Street to protest against the landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision known as Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission.
We'll have an America totally controlled by corporations.
Sooner rather than later, they will implant the legislators of their choice.
Now, for a very small percentage of your wealth, we're going to give you the opportunity to own the United States government.
As a person, you're worried all that there's too much money in politics.
This landmark Supreme Court case reinterpreted that First Amendment I read to you earlier. It concluded that blocking corporations from donating to politicians infringed their free speech rights. And so the Super PAC was born. A Super PAC is like a PAC in that it must be independent from the candidate, but it can raise unlimited amounts of money from individuals, from unions, and from corporations. And so the party started. No pun intended. The number of PACs in the US practically doubled after Citizens United, and spending has been consistently growing to grotesque proportions. The 2020 election is by a mile the most expensive election in history. Cost per vote for Democrats rose to $47, almost triple than the last presidential election, and compared to what Republicans spent. So where is that money coming from?
Jesus, Mary and Joseph.
Okay, we need some color now. Let's start with the largest super PAC for each of the main parties. The largest super PAC helping Republicans is the Senate Leadership Fund, who raised $289 million in 2022. This is a link of their individual donors. I'll drop the link below if you want to read it. Large notable checks are from the CEO of Blackstone, the CEO of Citadel Investment Group, Charles Schwab from Charles Schwab Corporation, and the CEO of FTX in Bahamas. On the Democrat side, the biggest super PAC is the Senate Majority PAC, or SMP, who raised $337 million in 2022. These are the main individual donors of their 2020 campaign. Large notable checks come from Fred Einecker, James Simmons from Renaissance Technologies, Jeff Skoll, the first president of eBay, and the Greater New York Hospital Association Management Corporation. But if you want to go down the rabbit hole, you're going to find an even shadier tactic. Because see all these company donations? What do those mean? In an attempt to keep some transparency, super PAC donations have to be public. But if you're a company and you want to keep these secret, there's of course a workaround. A specific type of nonprofit called a 501c4 that can donate money to political campaigns, including super PACs, but it doesn't need to disclose who its donors are. An investigation by Sludge found these 4 nonprofits tied to senators and congressmen, 2 on each side of the aisle. At least $75 million of the donations to the Senate Leadership Fund super PAC came from one nation, and it's almost impossible to find out who actually donated that capital to them. A similar case for Majority Forward, who donated $58 million to the SMP. Companies who use this side channel include CVS, Eli Lilly, and Aetna on the healthcare side, and oil companies like Phillips 66 and ConocoPhillips. And we only found out about those donations because their own shareholders in the company pushed for those public disclosures, but millions of those dollars are unaccounted for. One of the biggest criticisms against lobbying is that it's bribery. Lobbying alone, in its theory, it's just informing and convincing candidates of what legislation people want them to focus on. But super PACs and lobbying go hand in hand, and when so much money is involved, it does start to look like bribery, doesn't it? I mean, you could argue that a PAC or a super PAC supports candidates that share their mindset and their objectives. But the burning question is, how much of the candidate's mindset is their own conviction versus keeping their donors happy? Can they ever change their mind? Some of the most powerful and controversial lobbies are tied to super PACs. On the conservative side, the National Rifle Association, a prominent lobby group for gun rights, established the NRA Political Victory Fund, their own super PAC. That super PAC spent $18 million on the 2022 cycle. On the progressive side, Planned Parenthood Votes, a super PAC by the Planned Parenthood lobby, spent $26 million in the same cycle. And this extends to international affairs too. Foreign governments and embassies cannot contribute to campaigns or to PACs, but you know what I'm gonna say. There's a workaround too. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, through affiliates, provided $13 million in campaign funds to both Republicans and Democrats. There's a Saudi lobby and a UAE lobby as well, though they operate through multiple different entities, making each donation much harder to track. I'll drop a link about that if you want to read more. Okay, so we've made a very deliberate effort to just explain how this works, to just present facts to you, to get rid of color around the office, and not to make any judgment calls towards any party. I wanted you guys to understand how this works and draw your own conclusions on how the current political funding system is simply broken. The weight that interest groups have is completely disproportionate to the power of a citizen's vote. Political donations do feel like bribery at this point. It does look like we are just pawns in a game where decisions are made by others, for others, and we're just watching from the sidelines with a controller that's not connected to the console. We've succeeded before. Plenty of countries around the world have fixed this problem. It requires a straw to break the camel's back. It requires the political will. It requires agreement between parties. But most importantly, it requires us to understand what the hell is going on up there. If you enjoy these alternative views on politics, you should check out our video about Austin and Texas. We took a trip from progressive Austin into small town conservative Texas and learned a few lessons that we didn't expect. I'll link it in the description. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.